I'll never forget the sound of the front door slamming open, followed by the heartbreaking cries of my daughter, Emma. Her little feet pounded against the hardwood floor as she sprinted inside, sobbing uncontrollably, clutching a small, empty cash box to her chest, like it was the last piece of her shattered world. Her cheeks were stained with tears, and her lips quivered as she tried to form words between gasping breaths. My wife and I dropped everything, rushing to her side and falling to our knees. We wrapped our arms around her trembling frame, trying to soothe her while deciphering the chaos she was struggling to express. Her voice cracked, barely more than a whisper. She took it. She took it all. Her eyes locked with mine, filled with confusion and betrayal. The lady with the clipboard said I was breaking the rules. She just took my money. My wife and I exchanged a glance, hearts sinking as realization dawned. We rushed to the porch and saw the wreckage. Cups overturned, the colorful hand-painted lemonade sign tossed face down in the grass. A picture of Emma's special strawberry lemonade recipe half spilled across the table. And standing there, like nothing had happened, was Deborah Winters, the newly elected president of our neighborhood HOA, scrolling on her phone with one hand while clutching Emma's money in the other. The same woman who had made it her personal mission over the last few months to enforce every obscure rule in the book with an iron fist. Her smug posture and total lack of remorse ignited a fire deep inside me, something primal and unrelenting. All around her, our neighbors stood frozen, mouths agape, unsure whether to intervene or just walk away. But I couldn't walk away. Not this time. Not after watching my little girl's joy be stomped on like that. That morning had started with so much promise. Emma had been talking for weeks about setting up her lemonade stand, not just as a fun activity, but with a real goal in mind. She'd been saving to buy a beginner's telescope, a tool she believed would help her discover new planets or track stars from our backyard. For an 8-year-old, she had a surprising focus and drive. The previous summer, we'd helped her run the same lemonade stand twice, and she had used the earnings to buy an art set that she cherished. This time, she'd leveled up her ambition. Friday night had been a family affair, crafting signs in the garage, mixing her signature lemonade blend with just the right amount of strawberry, organizing the folding table, counting napkins, labeling cups, and sorting a change box with singles and quarters. She even used a little spiral notebook to track expenses and sales projections, an idea entirely her own. Her joy was infectious, and that morning, when we set up her stand at the edge of our lawn beneath a colorful umbrella, I saw a kind of magic in her eyes, the kind you only get when you're about to chase your dream. And for a while, it went perfectly. People stopped by, offered encouragement, bought cups, and smiled at her polite greetings. She had already made almost $20 in the first hour. From our porch, my wife and I watched, beaming with pride, as she handled each transaction like a pro. I remember thinking how beautiful it was to see her confidence bloom like that. But that moment didn't last. The silver SUV rolled to a slow stop across the street like a storm cloud blotting out the sun. Deborah Winters stepped out wearing large, dark sunglasses that mirrored nothing but coldness and control. Her infamous clipboard was tucked under her arm like a sheriff's badge, and she surveyed the scene with a calculating gaze. She lingered by her car, silently taking photos of Emma's stand with her phone. We noticed the unease instantly, but before I could act, she crossed the street with that rigid walk we'd come to associate with trouble. Her smile was thin and hollow, and it didn't reach her eyes. She stopped in front of the stand and tilted her head with mock sweetness. "Excuse me, young lady," she began, her tone syrupy and patronizing. "Do you have a permit for this commercial enterprise?" Emma blinked, confused by the question. "It's just lemonade, ma'am," she said innocently, holding out a cup. "Would you like to buy some? It's only $1. Deborah's smile stiffened. "This is a residential area. not a market. Section 7, Paragraph 3 of the HOA bylaws clearly prohibits unlicensed sales and solicitation within community boundaries. I could hear the words from the porch, and by the time she reached for her clipboard, I was already walking over. I placed a gentle but firm hand on Emma's shoulder and said, "Deborah, it's a lemonade stand. She's 8. We've done this before, just like other families. This isn't a business. It's a child's project." But Deborah had already shifted into full authority mode. "Mr. Patterson, rules are rules. If I make an exception for your daughter, then I'll have to allow everyone. Next thing you know, we'll have taco trucks in driveways and garage sales every weekend. It's a matter of preserving property values." Her tone was smug, self-righteous, and completely detached from any sense of community or compassion. I tried again. "There's nothing in the bylaws about children's lemonade stands. We've done this 2 summers in a row, and no one has had an issue." Her lips curled into a sneer. "Well, I wasn't president then. Things are different now. We have standards to uphold." Emma looked up at me, her little eyes wide with fear. "Dad, am I in trouble?" I shook my head, ready to defend her again, when Deborah made her move. She reached out and grabbed the cash box sitting on the stand, lifting it from the table with an air of entitlement that stunned us both. "This will be confiscated as evidence. The HOA board will review this violation at our next meeting," she said coldly. Emma's voice broke. "But that's my telescope money. I worked so hard." Deborah didn't flinch. "Then you should have thought about that before operating an illegal business." She turned to me with one final shot. "Consider this your warning. Next time it'll be a formal citation and mandatory board appearance." And with that, she walked off, Emma's money in hand, without a single care for the tears streaming down my daughter's face. The neighbors who had been watching said nothing. Maybe they were too shocked, or maybe they had seen this pattern before and didn't want to be her next target. But for me, silence wasn't an option anymore. I knelt beside Emma and held her tightly, my heart boiling with a fury I hadn't felt in years. Her entrepreneurial spirit, her pride, her joy. It had all been crushed by a woman with too much power and no compassion. As I looked at the overturned sign, the spilled lemonade, and my little girl's broken spirit, one thing became crystal clear. This wasn't the end of the story. Not by a long shot. The next morning, something had shifted. The storm that started at Emma's lemonade stand had begun to stir the entire neighborhood. What had once been whispers and quiet grumbles about Deborah's overreach was now growing into something louder, something impossible to ignore. With permission from Officer Martinez, we shared a short clip from the incident to the community forum. No names, no commentary. Just the moment that told the story better than words ever could. The image of Deborah confiscating a little girl's cash box spoke volumes on its own. The reaction was immediate. Comments poured in within minutes, some expressing disbelief, others outrage, and then something even more powerful, solidarity. Dozens of neighbors, many of whom we barely knew by more than a wave across the driveway, began sharing their own run-ins with Deborah. There was the single father who had received a violation notice because his son's bike was left out after dinner. A young couple who had been warned about their seasonal wreath being off-brand. One elderly resident recalled how Deborah had called animal control because their cat sat on the porch without a leash. Each post added fuel to the fire, and it wasn't long before people were speaking not just about isolated incidents, but about a pattern. A culture of fear and pettiness that had crept into our community ever since Deborah had taken over the HOA. It was as if our story had broken the dam, and all the unspoken resentment came flooding out. People who had once stayed silent out of fear were now finding their voices, and in those voices was a demand for accountability. 3 days later, Officer Martinez returned to our house, his tone serious but calm. He had completed his investigation and spoken with the district attorney. What he shared stunned us into silence. Deborah Winters would be formally charged with petty theft and harassment of a minor. The charges weren't symbolic. They were real, actionable, and supported by more than just our experience. Several other residents had come forward to provide statements about similar overreaches and intimidation. The HOA board, perhaps sensing the shift in public sentiment, cooperated fully and submitted their own internal documents. According to them, Deborah had been acting far beyond the scope of her authority, making unilateral decisions, issuing citations without board approval, and fostering a culture of control rather than care. The board scheduled an emergency vote to remove her from her position, citing both the legal implications and the erosion of trust she had caused within the neighborhood. That same afternoon, Deborah was escorted from her home in handcuffs. The sight of her being led away by law enforcement officers sent ripples through the community. Some watched from their windows. Others stood on their porches in stunned silence. There were no cheers, no jeers, just a heavy stillness as everyone absorbed the moment. The woman who had ruled with a clipboard and a cold smile was finally facing the consequences of her actions. It was not vengeance, it was justice, unmistakable, unrelenting, and long overdue. The following day, a certified letter arrived at our home. Inside was Emma's cash box, the full $27 returned, along with a formal apology from the HOA board. It was a small gesture, but it meant the world to Emma. She held the box to her chest again, but this time not in grief. This time in victory. But the story didn't end there. A local news station picked up the incident, and soon the story spread beyond our neighborhood. People from across the city began sending messages of support, and to our amazement, donations started arriving for Emma's telescope fund. Strangers, mothers, teachers, retired veterans, small business owners sent notes of encouragement along with contributions. Within a week, Emma had received over $500. She bought the telescope she had dreamed of and had money left over to save for future projects. Her confidence returned, brighter than ever, and she began planning her next stand with renewed energy and excitement. She even named it Justice Juice, a title that made us laugh and cry all at once. Deborah's legal consequences were swift. She was fined $2,000, ordered to perform 40 hours of community service, and placed on probation for 6 months. She was also banned from holding any HOA position for at least 5 years. But the greatest blow, it seemed, wasn't financial or legal. It was personal. The public humiliation of being arrested, the loss of her reputation, and the fallout with her employer hit her harder than any fine. The local real estate agency where she worked quietly let her go. They didn't want to be associated with the story, and in truth, who could blame them? Her name had become synonymous with petty tyranny, and people had seen the proof with their own eyes. As I watched her leave the courtroom that day, her posture slumped, eyes downcast. There was no satisfaction in me, no smugness, only relief. Relief that my daughter's tears had meant something, that the system had worked, that the neighborhood had finally remembered how to stand up for what's right. But perhaps the most ironic twist came from a conversation with a former neighbor who knew Deborah from a previous community. Years ago, before she moved here, Deborah's own son had set up a lemonade stand on their old block. A neighbor had complained, and Deborah had fought tooth and nail to defend her son's right to run it. She had gone to small claims court and won. Back then, she had been the fierce defender of childhood dreams. Somehow in the years that followed, she had transformed into the very enemy she once fought against. Power has a way of changing people, but this time, it changed a community too, and reminded all of us what standing up truly means.